49ers update time on this Thursday between media availability at OTAs and media availability at 49ers mandatory minicamp. That is next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. So I anticipate that being a busy week for the channel. I think that there's going to be a lot of interest regarding Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Aiyuk. We shouldn't assume anything, but if we are going to play a betting game, I think that Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Aiyuk are likely to be at the 49ers facility next week. Everything that has happened so far in the offseason has been voluntary. Next week, that's the only thing that happens all offseason that is mandatory. And the fines from the NFL would be mandatory as well for Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Aiyuk if they were not at 49ers veteran mini camp. It is the one event in the offseason that sends players off into their formal large time off before they return for training camp. So even players who are unhappy with contracts or veterans who would rather be elsewhere during voluntary OTAs, they have to be at the mandatory mini camp. So that's going to include Trent Williams. Now, I don't expect these players to suit up and take part in drills at mandatory mini camp, especially somebody like Brandon Aiyuk, because when Deebo Samuel was going through his contract stuff, when Nick Bosa was going through his contract stuff, both of them showed up to the facility, but they both just watched in sweatpants. And Nick Bosa was watching in sweats yesterday at practice. So was Fred Warner. The OTAs, this is mainly for the younger players. So it's a crash course. They want to get up to speed in time to be ready for training camp so that they have a fighting chance during training camp to be able to make a splash with the 49ers. It's tough when the roster is as loaded as it is. But we have more receiver news across the NFL. Today, we saw Jalen Waddle get a new contract from the Miami Dolphins. So now the Dolphins, like the Philadelphia Eagles, are paying two receivers well north of $20 million annually. And Waddle signed for, in the APY regard, $28 million annually. But here's the thing. We shouldn't be looking at an average per year because there's going to be a lot of fluff in average per year. I've mentioned this several times, and a lot of people think that the Brandon Aiyuk market is actually getting more expensive for the 49ers the longer that they wait because they're seeing some of the APYs of these new deals. But no, it's not actually getting more expensive. And I will illustrate why, because you should be prioritizing fully guaranteed money of these contracts. And if you look here, you can see the fully guaranteed money of the top 15 or 16 receiver markets, receiver contracts in the NFL. The ones that are shaded in gray are the ones that were signed this offseason. I've mentioned several times that average per year can be filled with fluff because the money there isn't guaranteed. Somebody like Tyreek Hill, for example, he leads the way at over $30 million per year. But the last year of his contract has got a lot of fluff in it. Take a look at this. The last year in his contract has a $43.9 million base salary that's not guaranteed. So it's not likely that he plays on that exact contract in 2026. The amount was pre-selected specifically so that Tyreek Hill could get to $30 million per year. Same deal with Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract. Our trip is waiting, says United in the advertisement. The Amon-Ra St. Brown contract is in a position where he has an option that tacks on at the very end that's not guaranteed that allows it to hit those $30 million. So Amon-Ra St. Brown at $30 million because of a team option that's not guaranteed. Tyreek Hill, non-guaranteed $43.9 million base salary. The conclusion to all of that is that we should be looking at fully guaranteed money. That is going to be the operative number in these negotiations. You can go for a vanity record. You can go for a vanity statement via the fluff, via the APY, but you can't do that with fully guaranteed money. So if we prioritize fully guaranteed money and we look at the receivers that lead the way right now, Tyreek Hill, even though Pete led the way with that contract at $30 million per year a couple of years ago when he signed it, he also led the way in fully guaranteed money. So we can firmly say that Tyreek Hill's deal is the most valuable for receivers in all football. A.J. Brown, right during the draft this year, right before it, signed a deal worth $51 million in fully guaranteed money. That's an extension with the Eagles. So he's firmly at number 2. The really surprising one this offseason was Calvin Ridley at $47 million, fully guaranteed from the Titans. That was signed during free agency. Notice I put the dates over here on the right side. The deals that we have seen signed lately that everybody thinks are somehow moving the needle for the Brandon Aiyuk situation, they're all down here in terms of fully guaranteed money. So there was Devontae Smith. People freaked out on April 15th. Only $34 million in fully guaranteed money, way short of the top. Amon-Ra St. Brown signed on April 24th. Same deal, $34.7 million in fully guaranteed money. Then Nico Collins signed a couple days ago. I told you guys it was going to be about $30 million in fully guaranteed money before I had the actual figures. Well, here you go. $32.1 million in fully guaranteed money for Nico Collins. Then there is Jalen Waddle at 35.9. Those were the reported terms from Pro Football Talk. 35.9 million fully guaranteed money signed May 30th. So the trend here is that the deals that have been signed more lately have not come close to the high water mark in fully guaranteed money, whereas the initial wave did. So A.J. Brown, premier receiver, that came near the top. Didn't quite break the Tyreek Hill barrier here, but it came close. I think Calvin Ridley might have been the most surprising one. You could probably criticize the Titans for that, especially if Calvin Ridley doesn't produce at completely elite level, since he's near that Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown number. Judy and Pittman, those are both big, full guaranteed totals, but they're not close to 50 million. I think that Brandon Aiyuk, with how efficient he's been, and I've written that article talking about what the 49ers can expect to pay Brandon Aiyuk, what we can expect from a potential deal. I think that it's a $50 million kind of gauge for Brandon Aiyuk in terms of fully guaranteed money. And again, that would be at the top of this list or near the top of this list. I think that between Aiyuk, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb, you were talking about true big fish. You can put them in the same category as your A.J. Browns, as your Calvin Ridleys. I know that Calvin Ridley, it's funny that we're including him in this category, but with the fully guaranteed money of $47 million from the Tennessee Titans, financially, we have to do that. These guys right here, these are relative B-listers. Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, even Nico Collins, who signed a little bit early. Maybe Nico Collins will be an A-lister by the time of his next contract, but he wanted the financial security a little bit early. Jalen Waddle also signed early. He's on the same track as Brandon Aiyuk as far as fifth-year option goes, but that option isn't until 2025 for Jalen Waddle. But money-wise, as you can see here, these guys are in the 30s, the lower to mid-30s as far as fully guaranteed money. That's B-list money for these receivers. The true A-list money is at the top. And the big question was, had Brandon Aiyuk established himself as a true A-list receiver? And, you know, I could go through this again. I think every single time that I talk about Brandon Aiyuk, I've got to put up some kind of data to show you, because it makes it extremely difficult when people are so fixated on only raw statistics to gauge the receivers, especially on the 49ers when they've got so many weapons. But this is a cool new company. It's called Field Vision Sports, and we could take a look at wide receiver performance for the 49ers. The x-axis is going to be the total EPA, total expected points added by every player, and the y-axis is going to be the average success rate. So total EPA, yes, that's going to be a little bit more of a volume stat, right? Because the more targets you get, the more catches you get, the more EPA you can add. But we have a little bit more of a rate stat, an efficiency stat on the y-axis. What is the success rate when the player is targeted? And of course, you want to be further up and to the right. And the upper right quadrant is a really, really good spot to be. Jawan Jennings, he's got a good success rate. They didn't utilize him nearly as much. He only had 19 catches last year. It's not to say that he wasn't very valuable, and they re-signed him yesterday, but he's in the vertical area of the y-axis, but he's over here on the left because of the lack of usage. Your upper right guys are Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, who had a 1,000-yard receiving season, even though he's playing without a core injury for much of it, and Brandon Aiyuk. Look at Brandon up here on the upper right. I mean, I think that really, really showcases where Brandon Aiyuk was in terms of the rest of this 49ers offense in production. The highest success rate when throwing to him, and also the most cumulative expected points added when throwing to him. We can also compare Brandon Aiyuk's grades to the rest of the National Football League. And this is something that I did in the big article. What might Brandon Aiyuk's new contract look like? That's going to be up on The Athletic. I'm going to pop it open right now so you can go ahead and check it out. But the staggering chart in this article right here is, and by the way, this is what it looks like. I'm copying and pasting the link. I'm going to toss it into the chat section. We're going to scroll down to the chart. The staggering chart here puts Aiyuk against the rest of the NFL and try to find him. The hint for you is that Brandon Aiyuk is up here, top right. So x-axis is raw PFF separation grade. Y-axis is the catch point and the yak grade. Remember that Brandon Aiyuk was in the upper right when we looked at this right here amongst the 49ers in terms of the EPA added and the success rate. Well, when we're talking about the whole NFL in terms of separation grade and catch point and yak grade, he's a complete outlier over here. Now, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill have both gotten paid for the Miami Dolphins. Look at Tyreek Hill's an outlier. Jalen Waddle's an outlier. They both deserve to get paid. Justin Jefferson, he deserves to get paid. And that's coming. And I think, one other thing with this whole Brandon Aiyuk situation, everybody's like, why don't the 49ers just learn their lesson and pay him sooner? Well, first off, learn what lesson? Because if you see the most recent contracts are signing for less fully guaranteed money. So the market isn't actually getting more expensive. But as far as when you pay somebody, these contracts, it requires two parties to sign on the dotted line. I think people need to be reminded of that. The 49ers can't just make a contract happen. Brandon Aiyuk has to agree to terms. Of course, if the 49ers offer some kind of exorbitant price, he'll be happy to sign right away. But that's not how negotiations work. Brandon Aiyuk is going to want the best contract possible for him, and the 49ers, as a good franchise, as a well-run franchise, are going to want the best possible contract for them. If those two numbers are far apart right now, then you just have to wait, because at a certain point in time, Brandon Aiyuk is probably have to come down a little bit, and the 49ers might have to move up with their offer, but they're going to meet in the middle. Oftentimes when two sides aren't ready to sign the deal, they're far apart enough to where if it's going to have to get done sooner, one side's going to have to lunge out of its way, out of its comfort zone to get to a point to where that deal can be executed. And at this point, I don't think that the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk are there yet, because I look at prior history. I look at 2020 with George Kittle, 2021 with Fred Warner, 2022 with Debo, 2023 with Nick Bosa. It took them past May 30th to get a contract done. And there's nothing wrong with that. As you can see, as I've just demonstrated, no, things aren't getting more expensive. And when you talk about what might set more parameters to help the Brandon Aiyuk deal get done, you have to think about Justin Jefferson's contract, and you have to think about CeeDee Lamb's contract. I think, again, between Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Brandon Aiyuk, those are three names that are much more likely to be up here in the top half amongst this A-list money, the fully guaranteed money over $40 million, maybe even approaching $50 million, as opposed to here. So we're seeing the receivers who are willing to sign at some kind of discounts right now, guys that are signing early, right? They're signing early to get a little bit more financial security in the now, but the teams I think are ultimately benefiting by not paying them A-list money. So Jalen Waddle signs a year early. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a year early, right? Nico Collins, he just signed a year early. Brandon Aiyuk doesn't want to sign early. He doesn't want to be part of this cluster. He wants to be part of the upper cluster. And I really think if you look at this objectively, Justin Jefferson, who's probably going to lead the way of everybody by the time this is all said and done, Justin Jefferson is going to help set a parameter that brings even the Brandon Aiyuk situation to a conclusion. That's the way that the numbers are indicating right now. And we'll see if that does end up coming to fruition. But I think the main key is to prioritize analyzing fully guaranteed money over APY. Also, remember that people are going to give you all sorts of information. People are going to act like Jawan Jennings signing for what, about $7 million a year somehow means something with the Brandon Aiyuk contract. It doesn't. Jawan Jennings is the 49ers' number 3 wideout. He plays a lot in the slot. He's an excellent blocker, but we're talking $7 million per year. We're not talking about money that's going to be 25 to 30 million per year. This is almost, I don't want to say a niche role, but it is for Jawan Jennings because it's a special one within the context of how rough and tumble the 49ers are. I mean, the guy is a complete baller, but he will maul people blocking as well. And they love Jawan Jennings. Whenever the man coverage is really focused on the outside receivers, such as it is against a team like the Chiefs, who really, really focus on locking down outside receivers, Jawan Jennings is a big-time target that the 49ers go for in such situations. So if you want to beat the Kansas City Chiefs with the way that they play defense against San Francisco, Jawan Jennings is a guy that you want on this football team outside, completely irrespective of Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel being on the team, because Jennings is going to do work blocking on the inside. He's going to do work making big clutch catches on the inside. Hell, he could even do some work throwing from his inside receiver position, as he did in the Super Bowl when he threw the touchdown pass to Christian McCaffrey. That has absolutely nothing to do with the contractual situations of receivers who play different positions than Jawan Jennings. Jennings is a big slot master, the nastiest receiver in the game when it comes to blocking. I don't see anybody else pushing guys into the Gatorade jugs. And he's making huge catch after huge catch in third wide receiver situations. Meanwhile, Brandon Aiyuk is a true X wide receiver. You rely on him to beat that man coverage on the outside. So that's the role that Brandon Aiyuk plays. And then Deebo Samuel's playing that Z receiver position. And obviously, he's a breed of his own. Deebo Samuel, he's stampeding people out on that football field. I don't think that we've seen a receiver better at accumulating yards after the catch, maybe in NFL history, than Deebo Samuel. So these are all A-list type players in their own regard. Jennings, maybe not statistically as a wide receiver, but he's an A-list blocker, that's for sure. And those go for a cheaper price than an A-list X receiver like Brandon Aiyuk. Those guys are going to be more expensive. So this is the kind of scale that we should look at the Brandon Aiyuk market. And we should remember that the larger picture is the 49ers don't get these deals done until later. Good signs, and I've reported this consistently throughout, good signs have been present throughout this entire process with Brandon Aiyuk. He wasn't avoiding the facility entirely before OTAs. He was still checking in, doing his treatment. That slipped out a couple times. I forgot who said it. A couple of 49ers players mentioned Aiyuk had been there. Aiyuk has come out and said straight up that he wants to get something done with the 49ers on interviews, and history tells us that these contracts are typically executed by the 49ers and the player's representative by about July. In the case of Nick Bosa, it took longer. But I do think that the 49ers are incentivized and, really do desire to get this done sooner than when Nick Bosa signed his deal. At the end of the day, too, the 49ers have Brandon Aiyuk under contract already for this 2024 season. So when we talk about leverage and we try to assign drama to a situation, you guys, this is business. These are negotiations. Aiyuk is under contract for $14.1 million. The 49ers have the fallback of having him play at that deal. Of course, it incentivizes, they're incentivized to pay him an extension sooner so they can move that money around. As far as the salary cap goes, they could actually lower his 2024 cap hit and buy some more flexibility. But if they can't reach a longer term deal that's amenable, they have that as a fallback. Brandon Aiyuk has a nuclear fallback on top of that. He can say, okay, fine, I'm sitting out, but then he wouldn't gain any of that money. So I think that the 49ers own ultimate leverage here, and that's going to bring the price down to something within the realm of what we're seeing. And I think that we'll have more parameters available when other A-listers sign, and that's Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. Both of them have more impressive volume receiving wise than Brandon Aiyuk, but that's not Brandon's fault. Brandon's efficiency is his calling card, and he's on a football team that, volume doesn't make sense for the 49ers. Nobody's going to have the volume title on an offense that has this many weapons. I mean, look at that. Aiyuk, Kittle, Deebo Samuel, McCaffrey, Ray McLeod, Jawan Jennings, Ronnie Bell, and Chris Conley. This is, by the way, where you don't want to be in the bottom left. That means that you're going to have below average success rate and below average EPA. I know not a lot of tries, not a big sample size for Ronnie Bell and Chris Conley, but I do think that with a big sample size, Brandon Aiyuk is up here on the right, an outlier in a positive way for the 49ers. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about the 49ers OTA availability yesterday. Their offensive line coach, Chris Furster, discussed their offensive line investment strategy. He was asked something along the lines of, why don't the 49ers use first and second round picks more often on the offensive line? And Chris Furster, the offensive line coach himself, he explained, well, because that's not the most optimal way for the 49ers to progress. Let's listen to what he said, and then we'll break it down.
I don't know about that's for John and Kyle for the most part. My personal opinion, this is my personal opinion. If they ask me, invest in guys that touch the ball, guys that can touch the ball and score touchdowns. And then there's a range of guys, second, third, fourth round, fifth round even, that we will find starting offensive linemen in. At some point, can you draft? Yeah, you draft Trent Williams. You draft the pick of draft where you're getting a difference maker. But there's guys that can make difference that touch the ball well into second, third, fourth rounds, or second, third rounds at least, and definitely in the first round. That guy that touches the ball, it makes a huge difference in the game. The right guard makes a difference. We've talked about it before, but that's where we're able to find fourth and fifth round draft picks. And if they've been, you go find, it's how dominant is the difference between pick 34 versus pick 54 in offensive line play. And that's what you're trying to balance all the time. So will we best available player, all those types of things? Definitely will. And were we possibly ready to draft guys higher in the draft? Yes. But if there's somebody that can touch the ball and make plays, in my opinion, you asked me, Chris, do you want him? I want the guy that touches the ball for me, because I think we can develop those players much more readily and have developed those players through the times, because we do have a specific things that we're looking for. We know what we're looking for through the course of time. That's the advantage of being together with Kyle for so long, that we kind of can pigeonhole these guys. Are we always right? Heck no, we're not always right. And nobody is on anything. So yeah, could you put 5 first rounders across the front? I don't know that we have to have success. And it hasn't been that case as far as running the football and protecting the quarterback. Do we have, yeah, we don't have 5 first rounders. So there's always going to be that. But the fact that you can throw a short pass to Debo, even though the right tackle's getting beat, it ends up being a 60-yard touchdown. So, yeah, the right tackle could block somebody, but if the guy gets tackled at 5 yards, you don't have the 60-yard touchdown. Boy, that right tackle did a great job. What's it matter if the guy touching the ball can't take it to the house? So there's the trade-off, and you're constantly playing that game.
So the 49ers, first off, let's get this straight. I saw a lot of people misinterpreting and downright misquoting Chris Furster. They have drafted offensive linemen up high. Mike McGlinchey in 2018 and Aaron Banks in 2021. Those are first and second round picks, respectively. And they have used capital on an obvious first round type of player named Trent Williams. So they have found it necessary to bring in what is at least perceived to be elite talent up front. But obviously, they are not spending the type of first round capital on the offensive line that some other teams have spent. And Chris Furster describes the trade-off at play. I mentioned during the draft that, a receiver counts as pass protection too. If you can beat man coverage on the receiving end, the quarterback can get rid of the ball more quickly. And if the quarterback can get rid of the ball more quickly, it makes the offensive line look better. Football's the ultimate team sport. So you don't necessarily have to add at a particular role to make a certain issue better. If your issue is that the quarterback is facing too much pressure, you can improve the blocking, or you can improve the ability to get rid of the ball more quickly, either through a quicker release from the quarterback, or in the case that I'm just talking about, better separation on the back end. Chris Furster example in that regard was Deebo Samuel housing a quick screen pass for a touchdown. Even if the right tackle misses a block in the play, if Deebo Samuel still houses the play for a touchdown, well, that's going to be worth it. Even if you win that block, but you have a worse player than Deebo Samuel and you only get 5 yards, as Chris Furster said, well, who cares if you have the better offensive lineman? It is really hard to argue with the positive results that the 49ers have gotten with the way that they're balancing this whole offensive investment operation. This was the number 1 offense in all of football last year. Everybody understands, Chris Furster included, that the pass protection wasn't great last year. The 49ers are doing what they can to improve it. Dominic Pooney, for example, we heard Firster talk about it yesterday, their third-round pick out of Kansas. He didn't allow a single sack in 2 years of FBS college football at Kansas. Firster said this guy is a better pass protector than he is a run blocker. Remember in the past, the 49ers had prioritized run blocking over pass protection. Well, now Pooney definitely is a better pass protector than run blocker. He said that he's going to have to catch up a little bit in terms of the run blocking to be ready for the very specific things that the 49ers do at the NFL level. So there you go. There's an investment in pass protection. The 49ers ranked in the 20s last year. They need to get to a certain level of competence. They already reached it in 2021 after they signed Trent Williams and Alex Mack. It eroded a bit last season. I think they primarily need to fortify the interior, but yes, they do need to get better at pass protection. They have recognized this. They have made moves to address it, not just Dominic Pooney. They also drafted Jarrett Kingston, and they're also working that center position probably for the longer term with Bryson Mays and Drake Nugent added to the team. By the way, Drake Nugent, his dad, played with Chris Firster at Colorado State in college. Drake Nugent's dad is Terry Nugent. He also played a bit in the NFL. Terry was the QB at Colorado State in the early 80s. Chris Firster was the center, speaking of centers, at Colorado State in the 80s. I thought that was a cool little connection that we learned yesterday. But the 49ers do not want to just draft offensive linemen for the hell of drafting offensive linemen. That would be a preposterous strategy, and they probably would be a lot less successful than they are right now. They've been very successful over the past 5 seasons, both as an offense and as a team overall. In general, the 49ers believe, and I think that the data probably fleshes this out, that there is more ready-made impact talent to be had at the skill positions beyond round 2 than there is on the offensive line, especially at offensive tackle. We know how the 49ers think. They believe that offensive tackle necessitates a very unique skill set physically that's really hard to find beyond the very top part of the draft. This year, they didn't pick until number 31. Even somebody like Roger Rosengarten, who was really fast, I don't think that the 49ers believed that he had quite the lateral movement ability to deliver the way that they needed him to at that tackle position. Plus, he was also undersized relative to the average tackle. And, they might have liked Roger Rosengarten, but they didn't like him enough to take him with their 31st overall pick. And then once it came to the second round, they obviously liked Renardo Green better. So what the 49ers did is they waited to invest in the interior line because they thought that they would have more close to ready-made players available there. Dominic Pooney was a great example. They nabbed Dominic Pooney in the 3rd round, and then they grabbed Jarrett Kingston in the 6th. But drafting linemen just to say that you drafted a lineman at any position, drafting a receiver just to say you drafted a receiver, drafting a QB just to say that you did that is a recipe for disaster. You have to pick players that you believe will fit your system, that you believe are the best players available at the time that you pick. Because if you're just trying to make a segment of social media happy because you think of this event in terms of Madden ratings and plugging and playing a player very robotically, you're not going to be very successful. And the 49ers have a successful track record in the NFL draft. They have a successful track record of building a football team. And Chris Firster explained their thought process. He also said, we know that we're not right every single time because nobody's right every single time. But over the longer course of action here, when the 49ers have built their offensive line, it does seem, and I was the first to criticize that there have been some spots where they've missed, with some spots that potentially things could have been better, that could have helped this team get to a Super Bowl. But over the longer range, especially when zoomed out and when we view the entire offense and the entire roster, they have amassed quite the stockpile of skill position weapons. They have built a semi-competent line that I think took a step back in 2023, and they are looking to get back to the level that they were at pass protection-wise in 2021 and most of 2022. And once they can get there, I think that this 49ers offense can stand to take yet another step forward, even though it was already number 1 last year. Speaking of that lateral movement, here's Chris Firster on the short shuttle times of the 49ers offensive linemen that were added to the team this year. That obviously starts with Pooney and goes to Kingston and then Mays and Drake Nugent. all of those guys had short shuttle times of 4.47 seconds or faster, which is on the upper echelon of all offensive linemen that have ever been tracked. So it seems like the 49ers really focused on this. That was my question to Chris Furster. And I thought that he had a really interesting revelatory answer about what the 49ers look for and how much analytics might inform their decisions when they're drafting offensive linemen.
Rookie offensive lineman had really fast short shuttle times. How big of a point of emphasis was that in meeting rooms prior to the draft? And have you seen some of that translate on the field already?
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I know somebody sent it to me. I think whoever put out there, whatever. I don't have one of those social media things, but somebody sent it to me and I saw it. I'm like, well, that's cool. But I think it's more of the traits. We see the traits in a player, and it just so happens to translate to short shuttle. Now, short shuttle to me, short shuttle is a science. Short shuttle, you can train the kid to run a short shuttle. There's a thing to the feet, the hands. I don't know what it is, but literally they can just by training it properly knock time off it that doesn't demonstrate as much of their core skills, right? The 3-cone drill has a little harder. Doesn't matter how technical you are. There's so much start and stop and weaving. I go a little bit more on the 3-cone personally, but it's funny that the short shuttle, it obviously must have some carryover because these things that I talked about that we see on tape that you don't see our plays, but you see the traits of the player. It must be something that's good in the short shuttle as well. So it wasn't something we pinpointed. I've been with a lot of personnel people that go like, look, if an offensive lineman doesn't have a short shuttle of this, we're not taking him. Or if a tight end doesn't have a 20 of this or a 3-cone or a vertical, they won't take them because over time, that's what analytics does. They just chart on a graph and say, look, these guys that are under this number or above this number don't make it. And so they say, why would we take them? Because odds are they don't make it. That's a little too analytical, but it's a good jump-off spot to say, boy, they better show some other things to say they're going to. So that was an interesting stat. It makes me look at it a little bit. It's just interesting to see how it showed up. It was cool.
So Chris Furster acknowledged that he saw that short shuttle stat. I mean, I wrote a whole article about it, and he's obviously an old school offensive line coach, and that he's going to be watching the tape. He's not going to be relying on the nerds' analytic numbers, but you can't discount the testing, especially since that is inherently a more scientific way of doing stuff than the eye test. And I think that the way to succeed in football is to find the right balance between accepting the analytics, integrating them into your thought process, and also being a gut feel film guy. You know, watch the tape, get your feeling on a player, get your sense of what he's made up of, but also look at the stopwatch. Also look at all these great, more scientific measurements that we have at our disposal. And I think that there was consensus from the 49ers. We heard John Lynch talking after the draft, and during the draft, he kept on mentioning consensus. 49ers have an R&D department that's looking at the analytics. They have Chris Furster, who's looking at the tape. They have Kyle Shanahan, who's looking at the tape. They have a lot of scouts who are looking at the tape and also have intel on these prospects, who they are as people, what they can do physically, in terms of workouts, how that might translate onto the field. So you get all of these minds, all of this research, all of this intel, and then you make a decision after combining the multitude of information. And John Lynch highlighted that the 49ers had consensus this year. So we'll see how it goes with these offensive linemen that they brought in. We do know that the consensus led to guys who, by at least the tail of the tape, the tail of the testing, have very good lateral movement ability, which can help in both run blocking and pass protection. Because I think we saw 49ers interior linemen get their crossed up way too many times. Guys would cross their face. Defensive tackles would be able to cross the face of 49ers guards, of Jake Brendel, the center, and pressure Brock Purdy too often last season. And the 49ers need to tighten up. There in the middle, I think the right side of the offensive line is obviously weaker than the left, but I don't think that Aaron Banks was great in pass protection at left guard last year either. Jake Brendel needs to have a stronger year in pass protection. He needs to, I mean, he's in such a high pressure position because he's also calling out the protections. A lot of times when you do see a stat like 9 unblocked pressures on blitzes from the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, you naturally are going to look back at the center because the center is in charge of so much setting protections for the 49ers and any Shanahan offense up front. And obviously right guard, that was the weak spot of the 49ers offensive line. Spencer Burford gave way to John Feliciano, and then John Feliciano got hurt in the Super Bowl. Feliciano's back now. we'll see if Feliciano can play center as well. He's actually playing some center now with Jake Brendel out with knee tendonitis during OTAs. So there's a lot of different ways this can go, a lot of different spots for Dominic Pooney to potentially fill in. He's working out a guard, so probably left the right guard to begin. And we just have to wait and see how the 49ers are going to use the new resources at their disposal to try to improve up front. As far as Colton McKivitz goes, we had a smart comment about Colton McKivitz from Joseph. McKivitz took on a lot in his first year starting. Not one flag and kept to his footwork and hand placement. You cannot give up on someone after 1 year. Yeah, especially when there's, again, no clear-cut upgrade for over Colton McKivitz. You're picking at 31. The premier tackles weren't there. Somebody else said, and I'm not going to find the comment, but somebody else said, instead of picking Latu, they could have drafted an offensive lineman. That is exactly the wrong way to think about this. They picked Latu in the third. What third-round offensive lineman could you have guaranteed last year before you knew anything of how these guys are going to play in the NFL? What guy could you have guaranteed late in the third round would be able to step in and become a multi-year starter for the 49ers? You couldn't. You couldn't. With the benefit of hindsight in a few years after some of these rookies play well, I'm sure there'll be a third rounder, maybe a fourth, maybe a fifth round offensive lineman that has played well, but that's not information that you have on draft night. So you have to go with who you think is going to fit your system the best. Which player is the most quality talent in the context of your system? And that's what the 49ers believe, that offensive linemen good enough to make an impact in their system last year were only available in the first couple rounds, maybe the top of the third round. They didn't pick until later in the third round. This year, they believed that there were some guys at the very top of the draft that could make a difference, but they didn't pick until number 31. So it's not easy to get better in the NFL when you're already as good as the 49ers are. And that one weakest spot, yes, it is the right side of the offensive line. But one of the reasons why they have so many good skill position players on the outside is because they haven't had to pour a whole lot of resources draft-wise into that right side. So, I mean, they used the first-round pick on Mike McGlinchey way back in 19, not that old, 2018. Then they used in 2020 the fifth rounder on Colton McKivitz. He started for one season. You can say that he improved over the course of that season. And as Joseph says, you don't just give up on a guy right away unless you have a slam dunk, surefire replacement that you can acquire at a reasonable cost. So you don't have to compromise spending elsewhere. And the 49ers obviously didn't have that. Now, Dominic Pooney, he's an intriguing prospect. He's going to start at that guard position. That's where he's going to work first. That's where he's working right now. But he played tackle in college. And the 49ers believe he has true five-position versatility. So this is not to say that Colton McKivitz is going to be starting at the end of the season. It's also not to say that Colton McKivitz is going to be the same player last year as he's going to be this season. The 49ers are counting on improvement, but you load yourself up with realistic options because it's not a game of Madden, and you give yourself as much of this optionality as possible. And with a small roster, right, 53 men is not a big roster. 49ers have really liked offensive linemen who can play multiple positions because it gives them more of that potential adaptability. You can plug and play guys anywhere. And I think Pooney, five-position type of player, really embodies that. The more options you give yourself, the better chance you have at improving the line. They've already done it once. Again, the 2021-2022 lines were above average in pass protection, 2021 especially. I think the retirement of Alex Mack set the 49ers back a bit. They're probably hoping that he'd be with the team for at least one more year into 2022. He wasn't with them. 2023 was one of the worst pass protecting years they've had so far, but they had the skill position weapons and they had the great quarterback in Brock Purdy to overcome a lot of that. So I think they want to get that pass protection better, at least to a replacement level, so that Purdy can take the next step in his development. But doing so is obviously not an easy or exact science, and that's why it was so fascinating to listen to 49ers offensive line coach Chris Furster. Now we're going to move on to special teams and the new kick return rule. This is 49ers special teams coach Brian Schneider on the uncharted new territory that the 49ers are entering, along with the rest of the league, on the new kick return rule. Let's listen to this and listen to, and maybe even speculate a little bit about the different roles that the 49ers might assign on special teams for this new play.
Season when you get the news, it's a lot of anxiety because what you're looking at is the only thing you really have to look at is the XFL, and it's different too than that. So you really try to do as much as you can until the players got here, is because before it was all in my brain, and one thing would go to another, and then all of a sudden I think it's about here now for me, in terms of once we get the fundamentals together, once we ask the players to communicate with us, talk to us, what do you see, and once we kind of broke it down that way to get to, I think, some fundamentals that will stick in terms of how to get there. And now we have to see where it goes because it's different, that's for sure.
How much XFL tape did you watch?
A ton. And the difference there is they're on the 35-yard line, and there's just 10 across with one returner. So even 5 yards and the spacing and timing, it's just really different, and it's really, really fast. So you can kind of pull off years past, but the spacing and timing, and like George, for instance, for us, Odom, he was so skilled at speed, number one, and then weaving down the field to put him in position as it's developing. So I think everyone that sees it for the first time, it's really strange because you see the kickoff, and I'm standing right here, and it's just like it's like you're in space. You never see that happen without everyone moving. And so it's really like the music went off. I was like in the twilight zone. And then when it happens, it's really fast. So getting used to all that for the players, and it's going to continue to evolve. So
in what ways has it kind of changed how you view what you're looking for in a returner specifically?
Well, and that's where I think you have to start. It's all about the ball. And so that's where we always start. So you always try to anticipate what kickers are going to do. And it could be anywhere. So that's where we start preparing. So is it going to be like a shortstop? Is it, what type of fielding balls are you going to get? What type of guys are there? And then what type of runners are there? I mean, is it going to be better to have a bigger back where you can break through the arm tackles because everyone's going to be engaged? Is it going to be a quicker guy? But it all starts with the football. So that's where you build everything from, and really trying to figure out where they're going to kick it, how they're going to kick it.
Sounds like you're still figuring it out.
Oh, everyone's still figuring it out. Like, the way I feel about it now, again, that's the best way I can explain it in my mind. It was here in my mind with all the things that could go on. And you wanted to try to get some base fundamentals that you think you could, just from geometry, basically. And so you put all those in, and then once you see with the players, okay, now at least we have a starting point where I think we can get it pretty close to the fundamentals to get in position to make the block. And then we're going to see how it all evolves. So I feel good where we're at right now. And again, there's 31 coaches like me that don't know exactly if we're on the right track, what it's going to look like. So more than anything, it's going to be adjusting. And so right now I feel good, kind of finally with the players and getting their input and working through it all. But that's going to be, it's exciting. I mean, I'm fired up. This is the coolest thing to happen in terms of in my coaching career, because what are you going to do? You have a great opportunity to do something that's never been done before. So it's a race to figure it out. And it's going to be constantly adjusted.
There typically isn't a lot of room on special teams to gain a whole lot of efficiency. Every once in a while, you'll have a phenomenal returner or a phenomenal special teams unit that does truly make a difference. The 2011 49ers, the Tony Montana squad, that was one of those units. But typically, offense and defense have a much larger impact on the game. I think the margin with which special teams can make an impact this season is going to be much wider because of this new kickoff rule. So Brian Schneider's right. I mean, he's excited because he can have more of an impact on games, because it's going to be an inexact science for quite a while, maybe the whole season, maybe more than a year. Maybe it's going to take a while, but this is a radically new play. The players are going to have much, much less of a running start. It's going to be much more like an offensive play. And to be honest, relative to what kickoffs were over the past few years, that was a dead play. You had hardly anything coming out of kickoffs. It was a very neutral play. Now you're going to have a chance to make a positive impact or a negative impact on your football team with kickoffs and kick returns. It's gotten to the point where the Kansas City Chiefs said that Harrison Butker might not kick it off because it's going to be much more important to have a kicker who can tackle. So they might have somebody like Justin Reed, who's actually able to kick. He's a safety out of Stanford. They might have Justin Reed kick the ball off because it's going to be a whole lot more important to have that 11th player, the kicker, tackle. And the kicks, you're not incentivized to boot it through the end zone anymore. You're incentivized to put it into the receiving zone or whatever they catch it, the catch zone. And that's between the 1 yard line or the goal line and what is it, 25 yards up the field. So you kick the ball, you set up a return. The cover men don't have a running start, or at least not as big of a running start. It's going to be much more like a scrimmage play. So the question is, do you want bigger men, even offensive linemen and defensive linemen battling at it in close quarters, or do you want more tight end like bodies, or do you want Juwan Jennings like bodies engaging in some of that blocking? I think the 49ers have some players who might work well for this, because you probably want a hybrid of a fast player, a quick player, and a big player, with the rules being not, it resembles an offensive play, but it still has some open field special teams characteristics to it as well. And then you get to the returner position. Are you going to want a stockier player, or are you going to want a shiftier player? I think, again, the 49ers have both with somebody like Deebo Samuel. It's the best of both worlds kind of thing that might fit perfectly into the new kick return rule. The Isaac Guerendo, with his athleticism profile, 220, but 4.4 speed, he might fit perfectly into the new kick return profile. Meanwhile, the punt returns are going to stay the same. And the punt returns, they remain a very tricky play. The coverage units have gotten so good in the NFL, and the coverage units have outpaced what the return units have done on the punt side of things. A couple of years ago, we waited almost the whole season to see the first punt return for a touchdown in the NFL. So punt returns, there's a lot of potential downside if you muff the punt. And because the odds of a touchdown return are so low, there's not a whole lot of potential upside anymore. So the focus around the league, I think, should be, and the focus of the 49ers has been, to minimize the potential downside on punt returns. And I know they probably lost the Super Bowl because of a downside play on the punt return, when that ball hit off of Darrell Luter Jr. and Ray McLeod was unable to hop on the fumble. So they signed Trent Taylor. They brought him back, and he didn't muff a single punt for the 49ers back when he was with them from 2017 to 2020. They're going to work Jacob Cowing out at that position. Ricky Pearsall is going to work out at that position. And it's going to end up being the player who gives the 49ers the most confidence that he won't screw things up. That's the first thing, and that's the primary thing that you have to look at the punt return position. All right, let's go to 49ers Q&A. A few minutes of this, and then I am going to watch some hockey with my buddy Joe. He's a big New York Rangers fan, and they're playing the Florida Panthers. Still weird that South Florida has an NHL team that's good. Doesn't seem like the best hockey climate down there, but you play hockey indoors. You just got to have that air conditioner pumping. Robert Beal could be a really good special teams player with these new kickoff rules and kick return rules. You're right. He's added a little bit of weight, so maybe he has lost a little bit of speed, but they think they found a happy zone with Robert Beal. He's probably around 255, 260 now, as opposed to around 245 last year. I am ready for some questions. Let's go, guys. Does Pooney's ability to play offensive tackle allow them to keep one backup offensive tackle in Jalen Moore? I don't think that Pooney and potential tackle flexibility is something that's on the 49ers' mind as far as making roster cuts yet, because he's initially going to be working at guard. And if he only works at guard through training camp, then you do not factor him as an insurance policy at tackle. You have to see him play tackle at the NFL level first. So first they want him, get him very adept at the interior line, because that's where they need most help. That's where they need the most immediate depth. And then they'll start working him in at that tackle spot. I don't think that's going to happen before the end of training camp, barring some kind of injuries. And if that's the case, then I think that you don't factor it into your insurance policy, the tackle position. Look out for Brandon Parker at swing tackle. This is a veteran who's had some success in the NFL. He just has had 2 straight seasons cut really short by injuries. A little bit later on today, be sure to tune into this. We're going to go through every single player and every single position on the 49ers roster. So I'm going to go watch some hockey, but we're going to go through this a little bit later. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. I haven't scheduled it yet, but I think I'll just go live when it happens, maybe in an hour and a half or so. And we're going to have a big show talking about all of this on the 49ers roster. So Brandon Parker will be mentioned. Brock Purdy will be mentioned. George Odom will be mentioned. Of course, we'll talk Nick Bosa, Brandon Aiyuk, every single player on the roster. A quick rundown of what the 49ers are doing. How's that sound? We're going to be working hard. By the way, your feedback was taken. We put up the 49ers poster back there. Studio, it's functional now. It's not what it's going to look like yet during the season, but we've got it up and running on May 30th. All right, 50 minutes flat. We'll talk to everybody soon.